Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Mary Fiorito.
And I'm Betsy Fentress.
And we are delighted to have with us today His Excellency Bishop Michael Burbidge of the Diocese of Arlington. During an exciting week and an even more exciting month, we have not only the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, but that falls within Respect Life Month, and so there's so much to talk about. And Your Excellency, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Betsy. As you said, this is a beautiful time in the life of our church, especially as we celebrate Respect Life Month, honor our Blessed Mother. Lots of good news to share and to talk about throughout this month.
Well, as I mentioned, we just celebrated the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, and I understand that you spent that day with Catholic school students praying the Rosary with them. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
What a beautiful experience. We know that Pope Leo has asked all of us throughout this month to pray the Rosary with a specific intention, the intention of peace in our world, especially in these turbulent times, but also peace in our own country and our own hearts. And so we gathered with the students of our cathedral school. We were outside, and it was so wonderful to see our young children with their rosaries, praying with such devotion, such simple joy, childlike faith, and I was just inspired to pray with them. And that's all I did. I did not lead the rosary. I just prayed with them, and it was a very powerful moment, and encourage all of us to embrace that invitation Pope Leo has extended to us.
Can you tell us about the rosary in your life? Maybe any memories from childhood or the importance of any novenas that have been particularly moving to you?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to my grandmother, most likely, who prayed the rosary, I think 3, 4, maybe 5 times a day. She just loved praying the rosary. And yeah, that's something that as a child, you just cannot ever forget. And you knew there was something special there. So, along with my grandmother, certainly my own family in Catholic school, really learned the importance of turning to Mary as one of the special gift her son gave us from the cross. His mother to be our mother, someone who accompanies you, is your friend, someone who protects you. So I've always had that sense of, Mary being walking side by side with us, and to honor her, to meditate upon what her son has done for us, has continued to be a great joy, and is so essential in the life of every priest, especially because she is the mother of priests too. And we need her powerful intercession.
Bishop, what was your vocation journey? Did the rosary play a part in your discernment?
I would say probably not in a significant way until I actually entered the seminary. And it became, as you develop your prayer life and your spiritual life and those disciplines that are so essential in the life of formation, which is ongoing. It doesn't stop when you're ordained. I just began to realize, more importantly, of how this is a tool, in a sense, I say this in a beautiful way, a weapon against the evils and the forces against us. So I grew. I think the seminary was a beautiful time for me to grow in my devotion and my love for the Blessed Mother.
Since it is Respect Life Month, there's a lot of life issues surrounding the church, and especially in Virginia right now. You have a law that's being considered. There's serious concern. You wrote about it in a letter marking the month, the Respect Life Month, and you wrote that there is a threat in the Commonwealth of Virginia, a proposed amendment to enshrine abortion into our Commonwealth's Constitution. What should the faithful know about this, and what are you doing in your diocese to combat this?
Yes, as you know, when the overturning of Roe versus Wade was a moment of celebration, and after many years of so many people witnessing on behalf of life, praying on behalf of life, that decision was celebrated. But as I mentioned, only for a moment, because actually it was then that the real work is beginning, just in a new way. Now that it goes back to the states, and we know that ballot initiatives have already reached some states where we suffered defeat after, even though bishops worked so hard to defeat the amendment, to protect life. But the opposition is fierce, and those kind of pushing forth this initiative are spending lots of money to speak untruths and to influence people with not telling the whole story and not telling what is true. And so I've, been speaking with brother bishops who have gone through this experience. And, the one lesson that I have learned is that don't wait, start way ahead of time. And so a proposed amendment to enshrine abortion in our Commonwealth's Constitution is not yet on the ballot. The outcome of this fall elections will determine whether it's advances or is halted. So we're trying to remind people here what's at stake with these elections, because this will determine in many ways whether this amendment goes forward or not. If adopted, the amendment would embed in our state constitution reported right to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy with no age limits. All 9 months with no age limits. And although Virginia's law is already very permissive, it currently contains some modest protections. Parental consent is required. Partial birth abortion is prohibited. Individuals and healthcare facilities cannot be forced to participate in abortion, and taxpayer funding of abortion is limited. This would all change. This would all change if the amendment is ratified. So the proposed amendment would likely make it impossible for the General Assembly to pass similar protective laws in the future. And moreover, each of those few modest protections that I just mentioned would severely be jeopardized. And so we see that there is just so much at stake. And so we're trying to bring this heightened awareness before the upcoming elections, knowing how they will kind of determine the path of this amendment. And, if it does move forward, then we got to get to work in conveying clearly what this amendment is all about and what it would do, how it would harm women, how it would harm children, how it would attack life. And it just cannot be allowed. But like I mentioned, the opposition is fierce. And so it will entail a lot of work.
And the interesting thing is, Bishop, even people who generally identify as pro-choice don't agree for the vast majority of Americans with abortion. Really, after about 12 weeks, you see that opposition to abortion really goes up substantially, even among people who would consider themselves or call themselves pro-choice, who would take that label. And then when we say things like, look at this amendment, this ballot initiative would erase any kind of reasonable restriction whatsoever. They say that we're lying or we're exaggerating. I live in the state of Illinois. We had abortion enshrined in our state constitution. And even though our bishops tried to point out this will completely remove any kind of age restrictions for the unborn child, they said we were exaggerating. And then just 2 months ago, the front page of the Chicago Tribune announced what they're advertising as an all-trimester abortion clinic. And the advertising tagline for the abortion clinic is, your abortion should not be on someone else's timeline. I mean, there's not even an attempt to say that these are only being done on children with disabilities or, that they're done in very extreme rape or incest cases. They're just like, no, when you have your abortion is when you have your abortion. And so they're very real things. And I'm so grateful to hear that you're really taking the initiative to try to make people aware of this earlier rather than later.
Oh, absolutely. And it's unnerving. Even Mary, just allowing you to, what you just articulated, just hearing that is unnerving. It's so unsettling, I'm sure, for all of our listeners as they hear the same thing. But this is, another point to drive home is that parents have the sacred right to be involved in the most serious decision facing their daughters. And so that parents are just taken out of the equation too, right? And then, like you said, abortion at any moment is just a horrific attack against life, but especially as the different trimesters, there's no limits. There's no limit. We had the horrific statement of a former governor who said, maybe even after birth too. Mm-hmm. So where's it going to end? Where is it going to stop? If we don't get this right in the beginning and we don't understand life is sacred from the very first moment of conception, then it would all those consequences you just talked about. There would just be no end to it. And so, and again, and we all know of the wounds that cause because we are pro mother and we are pro child. And so, yes, we want to protect the life, the most vulnerable of the child, but we're also pro mother. We know the wounds that these abortions will cause, and so in a sense, part of the work that we have to do is to convince the faithful that we as a church we are pro mother, we are pro child. And so we are here to accompany a mother, maybe in a unwanted pregnancy or a time who a woman just feels so alone, which she doesn't know. You're not alone. We will be here with you. We'll walk with you. We'll provide you housing. We'll provide you counseling. We'll provide you everything your baby needs. So abortion doesn't even have to be a choice. And so we have to, I think, convince those who will be voting on this issue is that the church isn't only against something, we are for. We are for mother, we are for child, and our actions through our charitable works, our counseling, everything reflect that we're here to accompany.
Another pro-life issue near and dear to your heart is serving children with disabilities. And the Catholic schools in Arlington are known for inclusion. What have you done in particular way to welcome these people with disabilities and to help families? And how can we learn from befriending and accompanying those people with special needs?
Yeah, you're right. It's very dear to my heart. And, when I came to the diocese almost 9 years ago, I was so overjoyed in knowing that all four of our Catholic high schools had the persons with disabilities had access to our schools and not just finding some space for them in school. They were part of the school, full inclusion, walking side by side with the fellow students, having lunch together, going to class together, being part of the activities together. And so my goal has been to build upon that, where our diocesan goal is every school, should have open arms and the ability to embrace children with learning or intellectual developmental disabilities. And we're getting there. We're not there yet, but we have made progress, and we're not going to tire of getting towards that goal. And there is work involved with that, and there's training, and there's resources, and there's finances. We understand that. But I always use the example of one of my pastors when he received this encouragement. And they eventually, our school welcomes our young people with these disabilities. And when he's asked about it, he says, "You know what we did? We began this way. We said, we are going to do this. We are going to do this because this is the gospel of life. This is a mandate." And then we found a way. And I think that's the perfect approach. If we say we should do this, this is what the Lord calls us to do, so we're going to do it. You will find a way. You will find a way with the grace of God. And I cannot tell you what our young people with the developmental, emotional, learning disabilities bring to our school. They are the gift to us. And they lift up the rest of the students in such a way and bring out the best in them. And like I said, this isn't just a distinct wing in the building. These students are going to school like every other freshman or sophomore or junior or senior and participating in all those activities. And they have mentors and peer friends. And I just think this is the gospel of life. It is.
Well, speaking of the Gospel of Life, or Evangelium Vitae, which is largely based on the consistent ethic of life, St. John Paul II, of course, beautifully links together so many issues. He doesn't equate them, but he does link them. That particular topic of the consistent ethic has been in even the secular media recently, in terms of how we might deal with some politicians on either side of the aisle who would be certainly supportive of the church's teaching in one area, but perhaps would be challenged on some other areas. How do you go about trying to incorporate the consistent ethic, and more importantly, to teach about it in a way so that people understand what John Paul II was saying in that document, but also what you and your brother bishops have said in documents like Catholics and Political Life?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Mary, that we are very clear, and you gave a great example in St. John Paul II, telling us why the protection of the most vulnerable, the ones who have no voice, the ones who are attacked and killed in such great numbers, has to be our preeminent issue, because we have to get it right from the beginning. We have to understand that right from the beginning. And with that flows that core belief that applies to every single person. Why is life to be protected, cherished, and sacred? Because it is from God, and within that person, it dwells the Holy Spirit, someone in God's very image and likeness. And so it begins at conception, but it's at every stage of life, and we can't pick and choose. Well, when we apply this or when we don't apply it. It applies to those with disabilities. It applies with the sick, the suffering, the elderly, the mentally ill, the immigrant, the migrant. Everyone is to be recognized as a child of God and treated with that respect. And every person's life is to be cherished and protected. We must be consistent. And so, that's always an ongoing engagement with those we elect to represent us. And as bishops, we're not politicians, we're pastors. And so as pastors, it's our sacred duty to teach and to engage, especially those who distance themselves from this consistency in practicing the gospel of life, and to engage them and to welcome in a conversation with them of what the church teaches and why and how this is applied. And so that engagement sometimes takes place, in informal ways, in conversations that are private, that are not always known to the public or to the faithful. Sometimes it is through letters. Sometimes it's through a public statement. But the one thing that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle. That's the beautiful part about our Catholic Church. That's what makes us so proud. We're not about one side of the aisle. We're always consistent when we teach the gospel of life.
So, with this issue that's been in the news about dealing with politicians and awards, will this become part of the agenda of your meeting in November, where maybe it's time to revisit it if you feel like different archdioceses might have different policies in place, and you try to streamline those policies all into one?
I don't know if it will be a formal agenda item, but I'm sure it will be discussion among the bishops in light of recent news. But the USCCB does have a policy that really we have agreed as brother bishops that we do not give recognition or honors or a platform to anyone who has publicly and blatantly spoken out against our core beliefs, and namely the gospel of life. So we've already agreed as a conference of bishops that is our policy, and I think most dioceses have incorporated that in their own diocesan policies. And again, we're back to the consistency with the ethic of life. I don't know. In elected office, it may be hard to find someone who will be so consistent and check off every box as this is the gospel of life, and this applies with each and every person. And so if it doesn't, then that's not someone that we honor or recognize or lift up by an award. We continue to engage, we continue to dialogue, we thank them for the areas where they're doing good in work. That there's nothing wrong with that. But to invite someone to be a commencement speaker or to be a diocesan conference speaker or to honor someone who is doing just the opposite and not being consistent. That's a great way of teaching, and that's being, I think, faithful to what we've agreed upon.
And Bishop, this will be the first November meeting of the USCCB since the election of our new Holy Father, Pope Leo. And one of his, I think if there's any consistent theme to the papacy thus far, it's that of unity and him calling us to be people of unity. How do you think that particular emphasis on unity will affect your meeting this November, if at all?
Yeah, I think the unity for which Christ Himself prayed for, Father, that they may be one as we are one, you and me, and I and you, is something we're all praying for within our church, within our world, within our country, within the Assembly of Bishops. That unity is so important, and that unity, Mary, is only achieved when we are able to speak to each other in truth and in love and with respect and with mutual listening. But unity doesn't mean that we tolerate each other. It doesn't mean we just give in. It doesn't mean we just agree on everything, right? You can't
Hmm.
have unity while disagreeing on certain positions. By agreeing to continue the discussion, continue the mutual cooperation and respect, but speaking to one another truthfully. And not to fear or lack courage to say something that may be difficult or may be sensitive. And very often the bishops' meetings allow us to do that. Sometimes in public session, sometimes in executive session, sometimes in fraternal when we meet as regions, and sometimes privately at lunch or whatever. And I really do hope, I always enjoy going to the bishops' meetings because, first of all, it brings us together. I love being with my brother bishops. I love having these kind of conversations, even though sometimes it may be difficult. And I would say, I think that the average Catholic parishioner, if they saw the way that bishops engaged with each other, prayed with each other, treated each other, conversed with each other, I think they'd be very proud of their bishops. Doesn't mean we don't disagree, doesn't mean that we don't sometimes fiercely disagree, but I think they would be very proud of how we are, all of us are working to reflect that unity for which Christ prayed and which our Holy Father is encouraging us to embrace.
Had you ever met our current Holy Father
I have
before?
not.
Yeah.
No, I'm getting jealous because all these people are coming back from my diocese telling me that they've met the Pope. I'm like, well, that's nice. I haven't met him yet. But I know many people who know him, but I have not met him. I have not met him personally.
Yeah, as I was looking through some old pictures, and I was present at Cardinal Supich's installation, then Archbishop Supich, and I was looking at a picture of Bishop Paprocki actually, and standing right in back of him at that installation mass was Pope Leo, and I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before, but it's funny, just him being an American, where pictures of him are popping up. It's a lot of fun,
I
actually.
know, I know. And how about the one at the World Series too,
Oh,
when he
that's
was? That's
yeah.
great. Now that seat is like reserved or something,
It
right?
is. Yes, they have a little shrine there, and I think
Yeah,
the Chicago White Sox have a whole new cadre of new fans.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's well, Bishop. As we wrap up here, October, as we started out with, we were talking about it's a terrific month, being dedicated to the Rosary and also to promotion of life. Do you have any particular saints that you have a special devotion to, and who would they be and why?
Oh, yeah. I love my patron, right, is St. Michael the Archangel. And so I have a great devotion to St. Michael the Archangel, as well as my confirmation saint, St. Francis of Assisi. So they are two of my favorite saints. I have a great devotion to St. John Paul II. St. John Paul II, when I was a third year in my seminary, became the new pope, and he visited our seminary as the new pope. He was only 6 months the pope. And here he came. I'll never forget, being I was only my third year in the seminary, and the chapel doors opening and seeing the white cassock. And this, at that time, what was he, like 58, 59?
It was
This young
46 years
pope.
ago this week.
I know, right? So
Yeah.
he comes walking down the aisle and he's like so energetic and strong. He gave like a few minutes talk on the priesthood. I would have laid down on the floor to be ordained a priest at that very moment.
Mm.
He just so inspired me. And he was also the Holy Father who named me a bishop. And in fact, he gave me a cross when I was in there in Rome to thank him. And it's one that my pectoral cross that I wear most of the time. And I often, now that it's a relic, because he touched it, I hold on to that cross a lot and ask for his powerful intercession. And also, as a son of Philadelphia, as my home archdiocese, I have a great devotion to St. John Newman, who is the Bishop of Philadelphia, fourth Bishop of Philadelphia, as well as St. Catherine Drexel, two saints from my home archdiocese.
Bishop, it's been just a delight to have you on our show, and we thank you so much for joining us. To learn
Yeah.
more about Bishop Burbidge, please visit arlingtondiocese.org, and to learn more about the Catholic Association and follow everything we do, visit catholicassociation.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Mary, and thank you both for all that you do to communicate the good news and the gospel of life. We're so grateful to both of you as well.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire,
And I'm Betsy Fentress.
and we are happy to have with us the one and only president of the March for Life, Jenny Bradley Lichter. She also happens to be a friend of ours, and we have many things in common, but among them is a shared commitment to life. And we are only a few months away from the March for Life, which is the largest annual gathering of pro-lifers. And Jenny has been on the ground in several state marches, and we're so glad to have you back with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back. It is always a pleasure to talk to you, ladies.
So, Jenny, we had you on the show in January of this year, right around the time of, I believe it was your first March for Life as the president. So tell us, now that you've had about 9 months under your belt in this new role, and in particular, you've had the opportunity to go to several states to their marches, and which is really where the movement has been heading. So tell us, what is your perspective on things now, especially in the states where you've been?
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, that's right. I wasn't even the president at this past January. I was the presidential apprentice. I was sort of job shadowing Jeannie Mancini at this past national march. So the 2026 march will be the first time that I have been fully engaged in the planning process. And if we have a little bit of time at the end, I'd love to tell you about our theme, which we just revealed last week for the 2026 march. But you're right that another big part of our organization's programming and our charism, if you will, is that we host state marches for life, kind of little microcosms of the national march in 19 states across the country. Next year will be in even more, as this program is really popular and kind of constantly growing as more and more states reach out and tell us they'd like to partner with us for state marches. So I have been on the road in the spring and the fall, especially, which is when our state marches are. They take place during state legislative sessions, typically the spring and the fall. So I have been in Arizona, in Colorado, in Iowa, most recently in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Just a week or two ago, I'll be in Michigan coming up, and a few other places as well. And these events, I have to tell you, I love them even more than I expected to because they are so grassrootsy and so energetic and so organic. Again, they're like the National March, but on a smaller scale. They're less polished, and they each have their own sort of individual character, which has been really interesting to see as well as we see the face and of the different pro-life communities in these different places. At the Connecticut March for Life, there was a big presence of seminarians, which was interesting and not something I was expecting. But the seminarians from a couple of religious orders and the diocese within reach showed up in full force. And then a big contingent of small kids, a big homeschooling community in that area in Connecticut, all brought their kids out alongside our usual contingent of high school students and college students and parish groups. And that was wonderful. The Pennsylvania March that I was just at about 10 days or so ago was bursting at the seams with high school students. They were really the defining factor of the Pennsylvania March, and it was huge. There we had over 6,000 people is our best count, which is big for a state march. And there were Catholic high school students all over the place, and they were so vocal. I was afraid they would probably end up losing their voices by the next day. But you can imagine this wonderful teenage energy, which resulted in they were oscillating between singing slash sort of shouting the Salve Regina, and then chanting pro-life chants, which I was guessing were probably their high school chants or their team fight songs, where they were just inserting words about life and babies and moms. And then they were cheering and praying for Charlie Kirk. This was shortly after Charlie's assassination, and that was sort of their third go-to piece of content. But again, this was a number of different schools. There was a Catholic high school football team that came out in force. There were girls' schools, boys' schools, co-ed schools, alongside of the families, the parish groups, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, wonderful evangelical community. And that was so wonderful to see too. And I think Pennsylvania really encapsulates the best of our state marches, just with that youthful energy and the joy that defines the pro-life movement. And that's so evident at these local events. And then, of course, on a bigger scale in Washington as well.
Thanks for the update on that. And we have two big news stories that we would love to have your commentary on. One is the new FDA approval of an abortion drug. And the second concerns an article that you wrote on the Hill about an important case, Doe versus Planned Parenthood. Let's start with Doe versus Planned Parenthood. Can you give us a capsule of, you said it's an under the radar case, but why it's so significant?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. We can do a little legal explainer here, and I'll try and stay out of the weeds. So this case started, you have to cast your mind back about 10 years to the undercover videos in about 2015 or so that revealed that Planned Parenthood affiliates were selling aborted baby body parts, right? It's awful to even say those words, but that was revealed in these undercover videos from, again, about a decade ago. In the wake of those videos coming out, Texas and Louisiana quote unquote defunded Planned Parenthood is typically the colloquial terminology, but meaning they kicked Planned Parenthood affiliates out of their state Medicaid programs. They basically said, given what we're seeing, you are not qualified providers. You can't get Medicaid dollars. Planned Parenthood, of course, which is heavily dependent on Medicaid dollars, sued in federal court. The defunding was enjoined. In other words, the state's decision to terminate Planned Parenthood was put on pause while the litigation proceeded. But that was not a final ruling, which is important to note. Here's a key fact that kind of sets up the litigation that's happening right now. While that litigation was proceeding, Planned Parenthood continued to collect Medicaid dollars. They collected about $17 million, give or take, in Texas and Louisiana after the states had deemed them unqualified. Ultimately, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled for the states in that litigation. In other words, they found that the state's decision to deem Planned Parenthood unqualified couldn't be challenged in federal court, or at least couldn't be challenged in the way that it was challenged in that case. And so the state's decision stands. Planned Parenthood is kicked out of Texas and Louisiana Medicaid. Okay, so then what happens? Because remember, they pocketed millions and millions of dollars while they were disqualified, right? Okay, so now the federal statute called the False Claims Act says that you have to repay government funding that you took while you were ineligible, even if you were protected by a court order at the time, right? And the thing about False Claims Act awards is that they really, really multiply. The statute allows for what's called treble damages. You can get penalties, interest, legal fees. So when all is said and done, the best estimate of Planned Parenthood's potential liability is 1.8 billion with a B, billion dollars as a result of this case because of all the multipliers and the money that they took while they were unqualified. That's the litigation that's currently going on. The question that the Fifth Circuit just heard en banc, which means they called every judge on their court together, which is pretty atypical. It's a question that where Planned Parenthood is trying to wiggle out of having to pay a damages award here by saying, we were just following our lawyer's advice. So we can't be held responsible as an organization because our lawyers told us that it was fine to keep taking taxpayer dollars that whole time. So this becomes kind of an interesting legal question. It gets sort of wonky, but the question is basically, okay, that might be true if you had hired a law firm and they gave you legal advice, but we're talking about Planned Parenthood's own lawyers. In other words, lawyers who are employed by PPFA, Planned Parenthood Federation for America, who were being directed, or the argument is they were being directed by the senior leadership of the organization, right? The people running Planned Parenthood were telling them, okay, here's our strategy. We're going to do this on the comms front. We're going to do this behind the scenes. And in the meantime, lawyers, we want you to kind of back us up while we keep taking these Medicaid dollars in the meantime. So the person bringing the False Claims Act suit, who's an anonymous, I think, as you said, Betsy, John Doe, I think is Alex Doe, maybe is what he's going by in the litigation, anonymous relator. He's saying that you can't point to your lawyers as an excuse. They're your own employees. Again, this is not sort of independent legal advice that you're getting, right? So it's that question, that wonky question about immunity that the Fifth Circuit is considering right now. But the reason it's so important is because that question is probably going to ultimately turn out to be key to whether Planned Parenthood has to pay this money back. And so assuming that Planned Parenthood loses in the Fifth Circuit, which I think they will, the argument was pretty complex. There were a lot of hard questions on both sides, but I think the Fifth Circuit will say, nice try, Planned Parenthood. You're still in court. You can't wiggle out of this by pointing to your lawyer's advice. Then the case goes back to the district court, and then we find out how much money the district court and the jury are ultimately going to say Planned Parenthood has to pay back. But what's interesting about this is that Planned Parenthood itself has been saying for years, in its own press releases and through its kind of left liberal mouthpieces in the media, has been saying, this case is existential for us. If we're forced to pay back, over $1 billion, almost $2 billion, essentially we're toast, right? The pro-life movement hasn't been tracking this case so closely. Again, it's very in the weeds and technical. But I think we should take, in this particular case, take Planned Parenthood at face value. Even for a well-funded organization like PPFA, this is an enormous pile of money and really could be existential for this organization that's already having, frankly, a pretty bad year. And we don't feel bad for them at all because it's their own doing, but a bad year with a lot of bad press about how Planned Parenthood is bad at delivering healthcare. Setting aside the fact of, the number of babies that they kill, but they're bad at taking care of women. Their locations have unsanitary conditions. They routinely prep patients for the wrong procedures. They have all kinds of issues. They're closing physical locations left and right. I think 40 something at last count, including their flagship in Manhattan. And of course, Congress defunded them for the first time in history over the summer. That's tied up in litigation, but super significant. They lost at the Supreme Court a few months ago when the Supreme Court said that South Carolina had the right to kick them out of Medicaid. So Planned Parenthood is back on its heels, and this case really could be sort of the final straw that knocks down big abortion, hopefully, God willing, once and for all. So we've got to keep an eye on this case.
It's kind of surprising
about the bad years that they've been having. And you mentioned all the things I was going to mention, but the thing I'm interested in are all of these closures. I keep reading about it, and I'm curious as to why you think that's happening. Because if you read about the number of actual abortions that are happening, that number unfortunately doesn't seem like it's moved terribly.
Yeah.
Still have a very abortion-minded culture. And yet it seems like they're closing left and right, even ones like the Houston mega facility that I remember was featured in those videos. Why do you think that is happening?
Well, it's a good question. And I think you're right, Ashley, when you peel back the layers a little bit. It's not all a good news story. In part, I think they're closing because of lack of funding, right? In some states that have sort of clamped down on public funding for Planned Parenthood, they just kind of can't keep up without government funding. And then, of course, now the congressional defund again is tied up in litigation, but that will, stop this spigot that has been giving Planned Parenthood something like $2 million a day for years and years, right, of taxpayer money, which is insane. That's how they've stayed operational. But the other part of this story, which maybe gets to the second, I think the next thing maybe we'll talk about is the rise of chemical abortions, right? That although the number of abortions hasn't moved too much, it has come down some, I think, including in very recent data. Pro-life laws do make a difference in states where pro-life laws have been enacted in the last few years. But the truth is that more and more abortions are being done by chemical abortions, by chemical abortion drugs, and those drugs, unfortunately, thanks or no thanks to the Biden administration, you don't need to go to a Planned Parenthood anymore to get those drugs. You don't need to see a doctor in person at all. You can get them over the internet without even having to do, an in-person telehealth visit at this point because those drugs are so easy to access. So I think as more and more abortions are shifting towards chemical abortions, that's probably part of the dynamic why I think these surgical abortion facilities are closing. Bottom line, though, I mean, they're death mills, right? And they take terrible care of women and they kill so many babies. So it is still worth celebrating that these places are closing. And I think it means that the landscape, once the Trump administration does what they should do, takes seriously the safety data about mifepristone and puts more parameters around it, if not pulling it from the market entirely, then we'll be in a situation where I think we will start to see the abortion numbers really come down because Planned Parenthoods will have been winding down all over the place, and it will be very hard for them to ramp back up and open all of those facilities they've closed once there's a shift back towards surgical abortions. That's my guess.
So you wrote, Jenny, in response to the news about the approval of the generic drug. FDA approved a generic mifepristone, making chemical abortions even more easily available. I'm devastated that this dangerous drug, which has serious adverse effects for 11% of women who take it, is getting a stronger and stronger foothold. So my understanding is that Josh Hawley has called for the administration to look into these, but then on the other hand, they've gone ahead and approved this drug. Can you explain the landscape of that for us?
Yeah, it's absolutely maddening, isn't it? It's so frustrating. Now, the administration's position, which they've released through their spokespeople, and I think Secretary Kennedy himself, is that their hands are more or less tied by the statutory landscape, which does establish that if an approved name brand is on the market, in this case, the name brand is Mifeprex, which has been approved for 25 years. That's the name brand mifepristone. If an approved name brand is on the market, there is a shortcut to getting approval for a generic. The question is basically, does the generic match the name brand, right? So it's true that the law doesn't require or maybe even allow HHS to require additional safety studies just on the generic. I think that is right. However, what's not clear is why HHS couldn't have pressed pause on this, given that they are in the midst of, they say, a safety study on Mifeprex, right, on the underlying name brand approval. Why did this go out right now? Because it will just open the spigot even more, right? This is what a generic flooding the market always does. And in this case, there was a generic approved a few years ago. So this is now a second one, which will make this drug truly so cheap and so easy to get. Which is such a tragedy. So why did HHS approve this now? We don't have a good answer to that. And more importantly, as I have been saying to the administration in private and publicly, even crediting that explanation, our hands were tied, there's this shortcut established by statute. Even if we credit that, it really just points us back to the underlying problem, which is that this safety study is sort of moseying along, right? And what we really need is for the administration to be bringing real resources and a real sense of urgency to bear on taking a look at this data that the Ethics and Public Policy Center sort of broke wide open, right, with their study of insurance coding and now helped us understand. The FDA says this drug has a 0.5% adverse event rate. No, it's close. It's about 11%. And that means sepsis, serious infection, hemorrhaging, the kinds of things that send women to the hospital and can cause very long-term damage or even death. That's the safety profile of this drug that we're talking about. So my hope and our hope and expectation in the pro-life movement is that the MAHA administration, which takes seriously patient safety, patient stories, is willing to question the medical establishment and the kind of narratives given to us by the left, that the Maha administration will take seriously the need to look at the safety profile of this drug. We'll see what's happening to so many women. I think this is not provable, but I have to think that if this was a drug meant for men that had an 11% adverse effect rate, it would have been pulled from the market ages ago, right? It's just, it's
Right.
an intolerable level of risk, of danger. But American women are continuing to be told this is safer than Tylenol. You can take it in your home by yourself. You don't need a doctor to be involved at all. And it honestly, it just makes me so angry on behalf of my fellow women because it is so desperately dangerous, and not to mention, of course, all of the little lives that it takes. So that's where we are with this FDA approval of this generic. It's bad news, and it just highlights the everyday the dangers that women are subject to as long as mifepristone remains on the market in any form under any name, because it allows for the market to keep being flooded with generics through this shortcut.
Jenny, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I don't want to end without hearing about the theme for this year's March and why you chose it.
Thank you. This year, our theme is going to be Life is a Gift. So that's what our messaging will be for the 2026 March, and it's the messaging that we are inviting the pro-life movement to join us in. And the reason we chose it is this. It's very important in our movement, of course, to make the case for life at the level of the head. And you all do this with your guests on this podcast, and we do it at the March for Life, and I do it. We have to be armed with our persuasive arguments. We have to be ready to share the facts about fetal development and the dangers of abortion, all of those things. But we also need to be engaging with people at the level of the heart, right? The level of the head and the level of the heart. And our hope with highlighting this theme is to invite people into the pro-life movement at the level of the heart, really, by showing the true face of the pro-life movement, which is not shouty and not angry. It's really built on love. It's built on compassion for women and love for unborn human life. And it's just built around this fundamental belief that life is a gift. And that's the whole point of all of this anyway, is to protect and uphold human life, which is such a gift from God. So that's our messaging, and our speakers will all be sort of aiming towards sharing that message. And we are just so excited to really highlight and share the truth and beauty and goodness at the heart of the pro-life movement, and let that message kind of let the joy of the movement and of the day of the March for Life lead the way.
Well, what an important message for our listeners to hear. And I think sometimes there's a temptation to think that, oh, the court has returned this to the states. But as we've just discussed, there's still very much a federal component to this. And so I would encourage all of our listeners, if you haven't, to make the journey out to the March for Life this year, or if not, to find your nearest state march. I love that you highlighted how youthful they are. It reminds me of when the outgoing head of NARAL said, "My goodness, there's so many of them and they're so young." And that was more than 10 years ago. And, I now feel old at these marches. So
Uh-huh, absolutely.
it's so beautiful that this is something that the next generation has really taken on. Well, Jenny, we thank you for your time. We thank you for everything that you're doing. And to find out more about how you can get involved in this year's March for Life, visit marchforlife.org. And to follow all of our work that we do for the Catholic Association, you can find us at thecatholicassociation.org. Jenny, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me and for the great conversation.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences, where I am joined by our resident chaplain, Monsignor Landry. Always a pleasure to have him join us. And we have a great saint to talk about whose feast is October 9th. And he also has a huge honor being bestowed on him. Let's talk about Cardinal Henry Newman.
Saint now, John Henry Cardinal Newman, is one of the great minds in the history of the church. And on November 1st, he's going to be declared the 38th doctor of the church. So someone whose teachings and writings are meant to be guides to all the rest of us on our pilgrim way. So it's not just that they're free of error, but that they're positively helpful. His feast day is October 9th, as you said, Betsy, because that was the day that he became a Catholic. And he actually died in August, but his feast day, he's trumped by St. Clare of Assisi on August 11th. So when the church was looking for feast day for him, basically wanted to highlight the day that he became a Catholic, because his conversion was, after St. Paul and St. Augustine, one of the greatest conversions of all time. He was so popular and so famous as an Anglican champion in England, with all its privileges, there at Oxford, you name it. And he gives it all up in order to pursue the truth. His motto that he took from the shadows into the truth, into the light, all of that highlights what he was capable of doing. And he was able to make that great sacrifice because he was a man of the truth through and through. But for the rest of us, like, we're now getting a doctor of the church who is one of the most eloquent people whom God has ever created. We have to go back many centuries, probably to St. Augustine and St. Leo the Great, to find somebody who was as eloquent as John Henry Newman, and he was writing in our English language. He tackled most of the major issues of the day, and the types of issues and attacks against the faith in the 1800s in England are going to be known to us because many of the same arguments are still made against believers in our faith today. St. John Henry Newman shows us that way forward. And so he's going to be an extraordinary guide as an apologist from which we can all learn. And then lastly, we need to pray through his intercession for converts in general, but particularly that his huge Oxford Project movement in 19th century England, leading people more and more to the fathers of the church, and through the fathers of the church to Jesus, and then his bride, the church, that we really accelerate that movement. We know, unfortunately, many of the Anglicans and the Episcopalians across the world have been substituting worldly ways of looking at things with regard to human sexuality, for example, gender ideology. They've been looking at it through worldly lenses rather than the clear revelation of Christianity. And that's why so many have left Anglicanism and become Catholic. But we've got the doors wide open for anybody else who wants to join. And so as we celebrate John Henry Cardinal Newman's feast day, and as we prepare for him to be declared by Pope Leo the 38th, Doctor of the Church, and All Saints' Day, we need to be praying for all those whom the Lord is trying to bring across the Tiber. And we know how many fish are caught. Some are caught in nets, but others are caught with a line. And when they're caught with a line, they're caught by the head, just as John Henry Newman was, and we're praying many others will likewise be captured.
So does his becoming a doctor of the church really change the way in which the church uses his writings at all? Because I feel like I see his writings referenced a lot already.
So there are many huge fans of John Henry Cardinal Newman who cite him all the time as an extraordinary authority. That's not going to change. What I think is going to change is everybody else who already didn't know him and regularly preached about him. Now they're going to be drawn to him because the church has now said his writings are particularly solid. One area in which he's the greatest of all time is about conscience. He's written more clearly about conscience than anyone ever. The only one who's ever been close is St. John Paul II in his beautiful document on moral theology called Veritatis Splendor. He gave an extended treatment of conscience, but he was citing John Henry Newman quite a bit. When the future Pope Benedict, one of the greatest geniuses in the history of the papacy, was citing conscience and talks to you as bishops, for example, in 1988 in Dallas, he was citing and building his whole speech on Newman. And so in an age in which there's a huge danger about freedom of conscience, many people trampling on our freedom of conscience, meaning our relationship, hearing God and trying to follow him. John Henry Cardinal Newman's words there are going to be particularly prophetic among all his other writings.
Monsignor Landry, thank you for joining us once again, and happy feast day, John Henry Newman.
Likewise. Thanks, Betsy.
We'd like to take a moment to thank all of our loyal listeners who tune in each week to Conversations with Consequences. As you all know, the Catholic Association is everywhere. We were on TV to cover the conclave and the election of the new Pope. We're in print, we're online, and we're on social media. We've just launched a new Substack to expand our media presence and offer more great content from a Catholic perspective. We're on X, and now we're on Substack for Catholic Conversations with TCA. We hope you'll subscribe to our Substack. It's free. You'll find it at catholicassociation.substack.com, and we'd love for you to join us in our continuing Catholic conversations.